Welcome back to another episode of Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. I'm going to be looking at the automotive industry today. So something a little bit different, and it's going to be something that can be used as a contemporary issue for a number of legal studies topics, depending on what you're studying and what you're looking at. What am I talking about? Australia is going to get access to unleaded petrol refined to modern standards in 2024. This is by Joshua Dowling. It's in Drive Magazine, 18 May 2021. Fuel miser motorists will soon get broader access to the latest petrol engine technology as world-class premium unleaded is set to become the new normal. After the federal government pledged a $2 billion support package to prop up Australia's two remaining oil refineries and help bring forward long overdue upgrades to produce cleaner, unleaded fuel. Within hours of the federal government announcing its unprecedented support package, energy giant Ampol, formerly Caltex, confirmed its Lytton refinery, I don't know how to say that, near Brisbane, it's in Queensland, who cares, would remain operational, subject to the government's refining support package being successfully legislated as proposed. Ampol, along with Viva, formerly Shell, these companies changing their names all the time, a facility in, Geelong? Once again, Victoria, who cares, are the last two oil refineries left in Australia. 2 decades ago, there were 8. In 2015, the number of refineries was culled to 4, and in the space of the past 6 months, Australia has been left with just 2. So this is an issue where we're thinking about and maybe asking a question about what's happening with oil refineries in Australia. Is this an economic question? Is it a problem that we only have 2 left and we're propping these up with the government? But most of all, this is an issue where I think it's helpful to talk about the environmental impact, along with the question of money and the effectiveness of the law. So let's continue. It means cleaner unleaded petrol with a maximum 10 parts per million of sulfur rather than our current standards of 50. Okay, so it's literally a fifth. And 150 for regular unleaded. So that's a huge step up there. A 15th as much will flow from petrol browsers from 2024 after the upgrades are made. The 2024 rollout of cleaner unleaded petrol is 4 years earlier than planned, which sounds amazing, but still more than a decade after Europe mandated it. Australia switched to 10 ppm in diesel in 2009. Remember, this is 2021 here. The car industry has welcomed the promise of unleaded petrol that meets modern standards. Clean fuel protagonist Volkswagen, our friends at Volkswagen, car industry lobby group, the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, the FCAI, and peak motoring club body, the Australian Automobile Association, praised the long overdue switch to cleaner unleaded petrol after a recent study ranked Australia 85th out of 100 countries for fuel quality. Wow, 85th. Okay, that's a damning statistic. If we're talking about effectiveness of the legal system, then the fact that there are 84 countries in the world that beat us, remember there's only about 206 countries in the world. Volkswagen Group Australia Managing Director Michael Barsh said the federal government's support was a major development in aligning Australia with first world fuel standards. And that's certainly the case. We're not sitting at first world fuel standards if we're 85th. Volkswagen was the first and remains the foremost voice to call for the cleaning up of Australia's highly sulphurous petrol, Mr. Barsh said in a media statement. Remember, this is an example of lobbying. This is a lobby group. All right, car industry lobby group. The Volkswagen executive said the overhaul is potentially a big step forward to enabling Volkswagen to introduce the world's most advanced and efficient conventional engines. See, this is the thing. We literally, our fuel is too dirty for some of the Europeans' most advanced engines to actually take. Although some European brands have already introduced a small number of models equipped with sensitive petrol particulate filters, of course they have, that are optimized to run on unleaded with 10 ppm of sulfur content, the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industry said a broader range of cars was not being imported due to warranty concerns caused by Australia's current fuel standards. In other words, putting that in layman's terms, it's basically saying the fuel is too dirty, and they're worried that the cars are going to break down because of it, and they're going to have issues with their warranties because they say the car's, fine for 5 years, etc. And it's not, because they've got dirty fuel in them. The poor fuel standards in Australia relative to regions such as Europe and Asia have meant that some companies have been unable to introduce some of the world's best fuel-efficient and environmentally friendly technologies to the Australian market. Chief Executive Tony Webber said in a media statement, remember, lobby group. They're making all these media statements. It's a non-legal measure to raise awareness of an issue. Their issue, our petrol is filthy, and we need to do something about it. We now have an excellent opportunity to align Australian fuel quality with the rest of the world, encourage the delivery of the latest engine technology, and take further steps on the road to reducing emissions. Remember, this is the point here. We're looking at the environment here. We're looking at dirty fuel, meaning that fuel goes through the engine and that becomes an emission and it's more polluting. So, we're not just looking at effectiveness here, we're also looking at environmental concerns, environmental rights, you would say. The environmental rights of Australians to have clean air by their government doing everything it can to ensure that the cars are the best possible cars we can have. And this is all about fuel. We've also got the question that's happening at the moment of electric cars and how other governments are subsidising electric cars and pushing and giving grants to car makers and manufacturers to make sure that they are pushing the latest technology, and Australia is lagging behind. It really is. That's just my opinion. The peak body of motoring clubs such as NRMA, RACV, RACQ, so Queensland, Victoria and Australia-wide, and affiliates from other states and territories, the Australian Automotive Association, welcome the switch to cleaner petrol, but question whether the nation had a large enough supply in reserve. Interesting. AAA Manager Director Michael Bradley said in a media statement, Australia's efforts to reduce emissions from its vehicle fleet have been held back by the fact that we're being sold engine technologies designed for the fuel markets of Libya, Argentina, and Iraq. Ouch. The relatively high concentration of sulphur in Australian refined fuel impairs the performance of pollution reduction technologies used in modern vehicles. Singapore-based energy consultant Strata's advisors last year ranked 100 countries by fuel quality, with Australia claiming 85th place. While the oil refinery subsidy will see taxpayers pay refiners to clean up their fuel and maintain Australia's refinery capacity, the impact on fuel security remains unclear, said the AAA. Protecting Australia's remaining oil factories sounds like a security solution until you consider they imported 81% of the crude they refined in 2018-19. So these are guys who've got their oil refinery, but they're still importing 4/5 of the crude oil that they're refining. So it's a bit of a security risk how much we are reliant on other countries. That's what he's saying. The AAA also highlighted data on the website of the oil refinery lobby group, the Australian Institute of Petroleum, which raises questions about the subsidy's security benefits. The AIP website says refinery closures have not weakened Australia's supply security, and there is no significant difference in the supply risk between a crude and petroleum product shipment. So while the AAA praised plans to bring the quality of Australian unleaded into line with the world's best practice without increasing prices at the bowser, Mr. Bradley said fuel security can be bought. But if we are to significantly improve Australian fuel security, we need an integrated approach to fuel production, storage, technology transition, energy diversification, and emission reduction. So this article's actually got two kind of main things that it's saying here and different ways you could talk about it. For example, crime, we're not looking at crime here, human rights. So you could talk about the concept of that's law and practice, I'm in year 11, sorry. First of all, we could do evaluating the effectiveness of the legal and non-legal responses. So the issue of technology and the environment. So you could use that as a case study and say questions of resource efficiency. How much is Australia actually, giving to these fuel companies to have their oil refineries stay here? Enforceability, maybe. This concept that really we probably should have done much better. Responsiveness, most definitely, as a criteria of how effective the legal system has been. We've managed to get rid of 8 to 4, so 6 refineries, and now we're paying them to stay and to clean up their act, and we are more than a decade behind mandated fuel in Europe. So even longer. It's been going there for even longer than that. And we are 85th out of 100 countries for fuel quality. So that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. So a couple of criteria you could use there. You could also talk about human rights and environmental rights. So this question of the evolving recognition and importance of human rights from an environmental point of view. You could get that in there somewhere. You also could talk about, you could also do that as a contemporary issue if you wanted, with the promotion and enforcement of human rights from the point of view of our right to a non-polluted world or climate change, etc., etc., etc. And finally, there's some of the options you could do. Most certainly, you could look at consumers, because they're the ones that are paying for this fuel, and they're the ones that are copping polluted fuel and not getting the best cars for themselves, because they're not, we're selling fuel markets of Libya, Argentina, and Iraq rather than getting the best engines. So you could talk about that as consumers, but also you could do global environmental protection and this idea of where are we? Talking about, I don't do this one, but most certainly you could look at non-government organisations and they're pushing for and the effect of legal and non-legal measures in protecting the global environment. So all these guys are non-legal, they're lobbying, they're pushing for the Australian government to spend more money and to speed up our kind of sensitive petrol particulate filter cars with low sulfur content because it's better for the environment. The importance of ecologically sustainable development, most certainly. And I'm sure that would be a contemporary issue, this idea of cars and refinery, etc., etc. But also you could talk about not family or Indigenous peoples or shelter or workplace, world order, and this question of our security. Okay, so this question of what happens between nation states when it comes to fuel security. They go on about it, supply, raising question of the subsidy, security, benefits, etc., etc., etc. So you could talk about that. So a whole bunch you can talk about, thanks to Joshua Dowling's article in Drive.